Hello and welcome to Insight, everyone. I'm Nnamdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. Nice to have you join us on the program.
Good to have you here. It is hard to ignore what is clearly a rush by some state government or most of the state governments anyways, to conduct local government elections arising from the Supreme Court's October deadline of cutting off federal allocations to local governments without democratically elected officials. With that in mind, we're looking at the operations of state independent electoral commissions so far and the seeming political interference that have plagued local government elections, which many say continues to inhibit the goal of establishing truly representative local government. I'd also be recalling a conversation I had on the implications of impersonating uniformed personnel and what that trend portends for internal security in Nigeria. Elizabeth.
We will also recall a conversation on gender stereotyping, and this is because of the effects on individuals and society. And this is like a reinforcement to promoting our mental health.
Very well then, let's kickstart the program.
Whatever the issues are,
the National Assembly is constitutionally empowered to scrutinize,
however complex or intricate.
We have involved all the academia, the members of the academia. We have involved the academies.
Be it government policies or in fact any issue of public concern.
Our job is to help you gain clarity and make sense of it all.
This is not really healthy for our democracy.
There's a lot of aggrievance in terms of who has been in power longest and who becomes the governor of the state.
It's also in the quality of food being consumed.
After all, perception is insight.
And gaining understanding is also getting insight.
Our first focus is on the seeming powerlessness of state electoral commissions, drawing from what is in the Constitution and what isn't in the Constitution. More importantly, we will be discussing how that impacts on local government elections in Nigeria. At the top of some of what contributes to flawed local government elections is the absence of constitutionally guaranteed financial and operational independence for state electoral commissions. Of course, there are many other factors, but let's talk about that with my guest, Hamza Aliu, Executive Director, Initiative for Grassroots Advancement in Nigeria, INGRA. Hamza, it's good to have you back on Insight.
Thank you, Nnamdi, for having me here again.
Great. So I did some work, like some quick research on, local government elections in Nigeria. I came across these researches, that appear to indicate that local government elections have often favored incumbents and ruling parties since the early 50s, in Nigeria. I know recently there have been calls for state governments or states, electoral commissions to be liberated from the strangleholds of state governors, but I wonder how that can be achieved with full constitutional autonomy. Yes, we've seen what is happening right now with the Supreme Court's verdict, and now states are in a rush to conduct this polls. There are a couple of options there, being preferred on how best to make, these commissions more relevant, more responsive to free, fair, and transparent local government elections. Which of these options, that are out there most appeals to you, and why?
Well, thank you, Nnamdi, for that question. And it's a good thing that we're having this conversation in these very interesting times when we're looking at the issues around the Supreme Court ruling and, like you said, around giving local governments the autonomy and all that brouhaha that we have. And it's a good thing that you're also doing your research and throwing it way back from 1950s and shows clearly that not only have we been practicing the local government system, but it's also a good thing that we have something to refer back to. But it's important that we look at our current democratic experiment. We have, from 1999 till now, it's over 24 years that we've been practicing democracy, and it's the longest democratic span we've had in our democratic experiment going forward. And so we need to look at what has happened since 1999. We realize that even states did not fare well when we began our initial 1999 to 2007 democratic experiment. We saw a time in our in those early days, we can say early days, when most states went to one-party system, is because we were coming from a military background where the commander-in-chief is the commander-in-chief of the Commonwealth and also commander-in-chief of the armed forces. And so it made it very easy for people to align with the commander-in-chief and whichever political party he went to. But gradually we began to see that we began to be sophisticated. We understood how the process worked. We began to be very comfortable with the culture of democracy, and saw that gradually we've gotten to where we are, where it's almost evenly divided among political parties, not a one-party system anymore. And it's not one person that can call the shot at the national level. So I think for me, the major part of the takeaway from here is that we have to put ourselves in a position where we practice democracy at the local level for some time before we form that culture. The culture we have presently is that you put in non-democratic institutions in local government. That's what everybody knew about. They say, caretaker committee, liaison officers. You give it any nomenclature, people are comfortable with it. Nobody is comfortable with the aspect of having sole administrator. Remember, there was a time, 1999, we had sole administrators as governors, when the president can declare a state of emergency in a state and appoint a sole administrator. We had it, 2 states. Plateau was one, and I don't know other state again that did it. So we know that we tried it didn't work. Now nobody is trying to go that area anymore. So gradually, I think we need to practice the local government democratic experiment until we get comfortable and have a generation that are very comfortable.
So, Hamza, if I'm not mistaken, you don't appear to think the issue is the law. What you think the issue is the culture, right? But then what would you say? Because I would think, look, we have constitutional provisions in place for how this level of government should operate. So you do not think that the problem might emanate from the nature and structure of the existing law? Let me just draw your attention.
If you look at it this way,
just before you continue, I wanted to be specific to certain provisions of the law, and maybe you can take the conversation from there. You know, I was going to take you to sections 160, subsection 1 of the 1999 Constitution that protects the independence of INEC, which of course is the federal agency in charge of elections in all states of the federation. You know, that section of the law gives INEC the power, the independence and powers to make its own rules and guidelines, which are not subject to the approval or control of the president. You know, but sections 204 subsection 1 subjects the power of state independent electoral commissions to regulate its procedures and confers powers and duties on any officer or authority to the approval of the governor. You know, Hamza, my question to you is this. By ceding operational control to governors, doesn't that amount to deliberate constitutional disempowerment of state electoral commissions? Isn't the Constitution flawed in that regard?
Well, let me look at it this way. The power to appoint the chairman of INEC resides with the presidency, right?
Yes.
So, technically,
but it still gives it leverage and it gives it wiggle room to operate.
Now, it wasn't INEC that created the law that gives that window leverage to operate. It was the presidency, and it was the citizens that, after a while of practicing the culture of democracy, they said, no. We do not want one person to appoint because it's subject to corruption, subject to interference. Can we give more powers to the National Assembly to screen and make sure that there is a check on this executive when it comes to appointment of who becomes the head of INEC? The same culture is what we're requesting for when it comes to the local government elections. We're saying that, have we tried out the current legal system, and has it failed us? Because as we're speaking now, it is the state assemblies that create and formulate the laws that gives the state independent electoral commissions their powers to operate. We cannot say that the governors have interference, they interfere in those areas, unless we have done it for a while before we can now say, from looking at it, evidence has shown that this, if you leave this in the hands of the governors, they are going to. And I think I beg to differ. I try not to look at the system as bad. I try to look at the system as being, it is neither good nor bad, depending on who are those who are operating the system. we have not tried the local government system. Yes, I accept. There are laws in our constitution that does not give the state independent electoral commissions. They are just mentioned by name, and they are put under the state legislators. But it's the same way that the Federal Independent Electoral Commission is put under the National Assembly, and we are all comfortable with it. Why are we not comfortable with the SIECs being under state assemblies? For me personally, I would have said, if we want to go the whole hog, we're a federal system of government, 3 tiers of government. Why should the states be asked to do elections for the local government? Why should the federal be asked to do elections for the state? Every level or every tier of government should have its own independent, self-regulating procedure for leadership selection. That's what makes you autonomous. You cannot be financially autonomous when you have another person doing the elections for you. But since we have selected that it's going to be this system of governance, fine. We know that there are flaws in the Constitution, but the Supreme Court has now made it very clear that we were looking at those flaws from our own eyes, from the eyes of the corrupt person that does not want the system to work. Supreme Court has said, no, this is the reading of the Constitution, this is how it should be. So thank God, it's the same laws that we were using in 1979 and 1999 that the Supreme Court was looking at. And it has now proven to us that we were looking at it in the wrong way. So it's not our laws, but it's how we perceive our laws. And I think that going forward, we need to begin to ask ourselves, if we truly want something, then we can see it. We can see a remedy for it, or we can see a way for it in our constitution. I agree with you. We have constitutional issues.
Yes. But yet you're more focused on the culture and the democratic culture, and we are the ones who practice the democracy, because after all, democracy is made up of the people. I take a look at, in talking about democratic culture now, I take a look at, some of the results from the states where, local government elections have taken place so far. And I'm hardly amazed. You and I in the past, we've talked about, sometimes you tell me that, look, the makers and crafters of our democracy foresaw a nation of good people. Nigerians generally will be massively good. And so in crafting the constitutions, they did that optimistic of our nature and our values, that, yes, Nigerians will not be corrupt. Nigerians will be people with good values. And so that's why they crafted the constitution somehow. But, I look at some of these results and emanating from these states. Like I said, it's not amazing at all. It doesn't surprise me. And I'm sure most Nigerians are not surprised as well. Maybe except for the miracle which took place with the APP in Rivers State. Yet again, we don't have to dig deep to understand what happened there. With all of these results that we see and, the obvious trend, is it enough to shout victory and hail democracy, and democratic culture when the system is being seemingly hijacked? What we now see is a situation where opposition parties boycott council polls to indicate their level of frustration. Isn't that in itself, killing our democracy?
Well, I think, I like to say that people get the kind of leadership or the kind of structure that they deserve.
I agree with you there.
Depending on your level of sophistication, you will get a system that suits you. If you're very sophisticated and very intelligent and very educated, cultured, you're going to get a cultured system, because you make the system work for you, not you work for the system. Obviously, we are working for a system because we are not cultured, we're not educated. Democracy needs some sort of sophistication for it to work, some sort of knowledge level for it to work. An electorate that does not partake in elections will leave space for things like this to happen. For instance, you have an election where less than 5% of the electorate take part in elections. What do you expect? We run a kind of democracy where it's first through the door. I don't know how they're explaining it, where you can win by just one vote. It means that if just one person comes out to vote on election day, whoever that person votes for wins the election. So it means that we, who are the citizens, who are the electorate, need to get up and begin to say, we need to take part in elections. And I want to suggest that any of our palliatives that we bring in to fore, we need to attach that palliative to elections. Have you voted? Did you vote in the last election? If you can prove it, we give you the palliative. It means that if you do that, everybody will now know that voting is something that they need to do because they're going to gain something from it. It's not vote buying. It means that for you to gain something from government, you must show that you have voted.
But
you don't want to know who you voted for.
It may not be vote buying, but you're now forcing people to vote, voting by compulsion.
We want them.
Doesn't that negate the very principle of democracy, which the free will, the right to exercise free will to participate or not participate in a vote?
No, participation is not free will. Because at the end of the day, if something goes wrong, you will blame somebody for it. You need to participate.
That's when you don't have the right. That is when now you don't have the right to blame because you did not participate in the first place. You now don't have the right to criticize or to blame. But you can't force me to be part of something I do not want to be.
But again, you look at it this way. If you don't participate, it means that you are indirectly giving the power to somebody else whose choice may not be what is good for us. Now, this is where the problem is. It's now a moral question. It's no longer a legal question. And that's why I'm saying it is on the people's morality and how they see themselves that democracy will work for you. If you have a democracy of the fire brigade and the garrison kind of democracy, where everybody takes order from one person, democratic system will allow you to do that because it's about numbers. But if you are a cultured people, and that is why I say, let us practice the local government administration for some time and get to a point where we have a generation that understands this. Do we need a legal system for it? Yes, we still need to tinker with our legal frameworks. The fact that we have 3 tiers of government, yet we have 2 federating units, is an anomaly. It doesn't work.
You talk about this federating unit. I actually penciled it down earlier when you talked about federating units, and you think, look, we should at various levels have agencies or bodies to conduct, at each level should probably have its own agency to conduct its own elections. I wanted to know where you now stand on the position that the Senate took quite recently, where the Senate, took action to advance the option of establishing a new national body to conduct local government elections in Nigeria. That bill was sponsored by Senator Sani Musa of the APC. I think it's from Niger East. That bill seeks to create the National Independent Local Government Electoral Commission, as a federal agency to organize, to oversee, to also conduct elections for the offices of local government chairmen, councillors, in all 36 states of the Federation, of course, including the FCT. Compare that option that the Senate is pushing forward to other options like you've even preferred here, put that against the mode of appointment into the electoral commissions. Maybe some of this constitutional redefining that we've talked about, maybe redefining the powers and functions of state electoral commissions. And tell me which one you think will be not just cost effective, which one you think will be most applicable and perhaps, take us close to, that objective of free, fair, transparent elections at the local government level.
Okay, so I love the idea that the Senate is trying to be more proactive in terms of looking at the problems that we've gotten, the challenges we're facing, and trying to profile solutions. But they say if you are a carpenter, everything looks like a nail to you. You use a hammer for it, and so it's very, for me, it's a sad reflection of the kind of people we are when we think that laws are the only method of addressing challenges. It's not. If we're truly a federal system where power is devolved right to the community level, it means that we should be thinking of, can we find a way around the challenge? The challenge is that state governors are running amok, both with our finances and our politics at the state level. How do we rein in this band of persons who have taken the laws into their hands and have held us hostages? Because quite frankly, the state governors have held Nigeria hostage. And setting up new laws to do it may not work because it opens up the leverage that one person can hijack the whole 774 local governments. Because if I as a president want to have my party in the whole 774 local governments, all I have to do is appoint the chairman of the independent local government SIEC electoral commission, and I'll give the person a marching order and say, make sure all the elections are favoring my party. Which means we have given that power, we've ceded that power, enormous power, to one single individual. But if you have 36 local government electoral commissions, and they are appointed by the state governors, you will get to a point where some people, like for instance, if you do elections in Lagos State, for instance, do you think that all the local governments will come out from one political party? It's not possible. It's not.
But that is what has played out. Do you want us to talk about some of the results? Even though we talked about that earlier. Sorry, say again?
Lagos is a different. So you can see that in Lagos we have a different outcome. It may not be the way we want it. But what I'm suggesting is that we need to give it more time. Let's allow this food to dump properly, so that by the time we start eating it, it makes more sense. For now, we have the problem. Yes, everybody admits that these state governors are becoming kings and lords on their own, and they are causing a clog in our democratic experiment. Who reigns on the governors is going to be something that we need to do. And that is why I feel that the Senate is taking a reactive mechanism in terms of putting up these laws, rather than
you and I are going to continue this conversation. Apparently, it's not a conversation we can finish in 20-25 minutes. So we're going to have another part, a part 2 of this conversation. But just before I let you go for this part 1, I'd like your thoughts very quickly on, the judiciary stands and poise on those, and I mean states now, who violate judicial pronouncements in respect of local government autonomy. Last I checked, and I'm not sure if anything has changed since then, at least 8 states may not meet the Supreme Court's October deadline for elected officials at the local government level, as they have either scheduled their polls for after October or have yet to set a date for the electoral contest. 8 states. What do you envisage, and what should be the clear position of the federal government on these states? Very quickly.
I think that provision, or that idea that the Supreme Court set a deadline for states to meet up with elections, I think, I'm not very clear, but I read the judgment that there was no.
What it means is that if at the end of October, no elected officials, no federal allocation from the federal.
So it was the federal government that came up with that concept that we give you 90 days. Because 90 days is the minimum you can give to run an election in our electoral statutes, both at the state level and the federal level. So I think it was the federal government that came up with that concept that we give you a minimum 90 days. Make sure you do elections. Otherwise, we will not give you the allocation meant for a local government. But I think that will also be a problem, because does the federal government have that power to withhold those based on that electoral provision? I'm sure those states will want to test it out in court again. But to your question around states that do not want to keep up with the Supreme Court ruling, I think it's up to the Supreme Court to put its foot down. Because once you give a judgment, there is need to enforce that judgment. And I think the federal government has the power, with the power of the Supreme Court, to enforce that judgment. I think that 90 days is that enforcement mechanism that the federal government wants to do.
Hamza Aliu, Executive Director, Initiative for Grassroots Advancements in Nigeria, INGRA. It's always a pleasure to have you on Insight. Like I promised, or like I already said, we're going to have a continuation of this conversation, just so we can push this issue further and, take on some other angles, or, perhaps some other perspective that we're yet to. I'd like to thank you so much for coming on the program. Looking forward to continue this conversation with you. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you very much, Nnamdi, for having me.